Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to talk a little bit about the images I have on the first slide, actually. It's here in Missouri, we had been experiencing some severe hydrological drought all the way up until about the middle part of February. And the top picture shows a fishing pond just southeast of Columbia, Missouri, in the middle part of the state, and how serious conditions were, 5 or 6 weeks ago. And yet I took the other picture below that on March 10th, just a few weeks later, and it's interesting to note how quickly we have recovered from the hydrological drought here in Missouri, thanks in part to two significant snowstorms that impacted the state, as well as a significant rain event in March. So it's just sort of a side note on how things can quickly change from one extreme to another, and definitely in the right direction for a good portion of Missouri. A little bit of general information before I get into the discussion in regard to the collaborators and participants, some climate services resources, as well as some websites are listed. And then the agenda for today, we'll talk a little bit about giving a recap of the winter seasons from December through February, and then look at our current conditions, some of the impacts we've been seeing across the central region, as well as outlooks and questions and comments at the end. First of all, temperatures over the winter were fairly mild across about the eastern half of the country, not as mild as they were last winter. But overall, we had somewhat of a warm situation, mostly thanks in part to December and January and maybe the first part of February, because we have seen a significant pattern change at the end of February, and that has continued into the month of March in regard to cooler conditions. The Southwest, as well as California, on the other hand, for the most part, witnessed a below normal winter temperature season. With respect to precipitation for the winter season, a fairly wet winter, again, across about the eastern half of the country. Unlike last year, where we had a fairly dry winter across the region, we do note some drier conditions during the winter months across North Dakota, Montana, Wyoming, and as well as Oregon and California. But for the most part, for the U.S. as a whole, we actually ranked a little bit above normal compared to the 20th century average. And some of the Gulf states and upper Midwest and Illinois had nearly top 10 precipitation winter seasons. Let's look now at the most recent temperature pattern or trend that we've seen over the past 30 days or so. This is a map of the U.S. Showing the 30-day temperature departures, and indeed, we have transitioned from somewhat of a mild period in January and February to a very cool one across the country. In fact, pretty much the entire central region from Colorado to the East Coast has been witnessing below normal temperatures. We have a higher degree of below normal departures extending from the northern plains through Iowa down into Missouri and parts of Illinois, where temperature departures are anywhere from 4 to more than 8 degrees below normal. And a contributor to this pattern change, in the lower left part of the screen, you'll see an image showing the Arctic Oscillation Index, and that is a phenomena of pressure anomalies in the Arctic. And currently we saw a change from somewhat of a slightly negative situation, or a positive in February, to a decrease or a negative phase of the Arctic Oscillation up through the current condition. In fact, it's a very unusually sharp decline in the AO index. And generally what that translates to is an incursion of more Arctic air masses into the central part of the country. The jet stream has been taking a southward shift and allowing those colder air masses to penetrate the northern and eastern half of the United States. And so it's interesting to note that some very cold conditions we have experienced. In fact, if we look at just the month of March, we're already 3 weeks into the month of March, and with an expectation of these cool temperatures to persist through the end of March, it could very well be one of our coldest Marches since about 1996, or 17 years ago. And if the much below normal temperature trend continues, we might have to go all the way back to 1984 to find a colder March period. So indeed, an incredible change from what we experienced last year in March of 2012, which was the warmest for the country. Definitely a different sort of scenario this year. With respect to precipitation over the past 30 days, we have seen a wetter pattern evolve across the central region. On the left are the the accumulated precipitation totals over the past 30 days or so. You can see some heavier totals in the various shades of blue in the southeastern part of the region, especially from eastern Iowa, parts of Missouri, portions of Oklahoma, and on east to Indiana, Kentucky, and down into Tennessee and Arkansas. Some significant precipitation events over the past 30 days have occurred over this area and really has helped mitigate the drought condition, especially on the eastern edges of the drought that we had been experiencing. On the right is the departure from normal. We are running above normal for the most part across about the eastern half of the central region, a little bit of northern North Dakota, some pockets in Colorado and Nebraska, but generally the western half of the central region has seen near to below normal precipitation over the past 30 days or so. The highest above normal departures are pretty much focused in Missouri and portions of Oklahoma and a little pocket in northeast Iowa. We have seen a change, and of course with the colder temperatures from the middle part of February up until now, more opportunities for snow events, and that has been the case. On the left, you can see the accumulated snowfall, the departure from mean, from the beginning of the water season last year, from October 1st through the end of January. For the most part, some below normal snowfall totals across a good portion of the central region, with the exception of perhaps Montana and parts of North Dakota. We have a stripe of above normal snowfalls extending along the Ohio River Valley due to some significant snow events that occurred around Christmas time. But then on the right, you can see we've seen more snow events because of the colder weather, more opportunities for frozen precipitation, and we see a lot more green covering the central region, especially across portions of Oklahoma, Kansas, on into Missouri, Iowa, into all of Wisconsin, Minnesota. We've had quite a few significant snowfall events. Notwithstanding, here in Missouri, we picked up in parts of Kansas anywhere from 15 to 20 inches of snow due to 2 snow events that occurred over a 5-day period during the month of February. Looking at the latest modeled snow water equivalent to see where the water and the snow exist, we're going to focus on a fairly decent snowpack across portions of North Dakota, northeastern South Dakota, a good part of Minnesota, as well as the UP of Michigan and northern Wisconsin. Some of that snow water equivalent, it ranges from anywhere from 2 to perhaps as much as 6 inches of snow water, and so some decent snowpack in that part of the country, and that will contribute quite a bit when it comes to runoff, because soil temperatures are also frozen, and so when this snowpack starts to melt, we're going to see some potential flooding problems across the Red River Valley, and so something to keep an eye on over the next few weeks as we go into the spring season. Here's a couple of charts showing Missouri River conditions. The red line is the 30-year average, and the blue indicates where we stand now for 2012 and 13. On the far right, we're running a little bit below normal at Montana, right above Fort Peck, with respect to the mountain snowpack, and from Fort Peck to Garrison on the right, you can see we're also running a little bit below normal. In fact, about 84% of average when we look at the snowpack water content for that area. So not as bad, of course, as it was back in 2001, but we're still running a little bit below normal with regard to snowpack, both in Fort Peck and then from Fort Peck to Garrison. Accordingly, with that below normal snowpack across both areas, the forecast for the Missouri River Basin, the runoff forecast, is indicating below normal conditions when we look at March, as well as we go into the spring season, the melting season, and on into summer. Pretty much a forecast of consistent below normal runoff, and this is for the area above the Sioux City, Iowa, that part of the northern part of the Missouri River Basin. On the west, according to the SNOTEL network, on the left is what it was like about a month ago on February 21st with the snow water equivalent, and then where we stand now on the right, at least as of March 18th, not a lot of change. It looks like quite a bit of status quo with respect to near normal conditions across the northern Rockies, parts of the North Cascades. But as we go down into the Colorado River Basin, a little bit running below normal, and that hasn't changed much either. Maybe a little bit of improvement across the southeastern Colorado, but for the most part, at least when we look in the Colorado River Basin, pretty much a status quo situation when we look at now compared to about a month ago. Average stream flow across the country on the left is from about a month ago on February 18th. The oranges and the browns are indicative of below normal stream flow conditions, and the greens and the blues are near to above normal. On the right is the current situation. We can see some improvement across, look at the eastern half of the central region, especially across portions of eastern Iowa, eastern Missouri on into the Ohio River Valley, actually down from Ohio, Indiana, and Kentucky. We've seen some above normal stream flow conditions, and so obviously with the snow events we saw earlier and some significant precipitation events that have occurred more recently has led to that condition. We also have snowmelt that has taken place perhaps across portions of Iowa and northern Illinois with those frozen temperatures, soil temperatures, that has led to additional snowmelt runoff immediately translating into the rivers and streams. More concern, though, is, of course, out west from Nebraska down to Texas, where we still have a severe hydrological drought impacting that much of that part of the country. We still see those below normal river and stream flow levels. This is the Mississippi River conditions, the discharge on the Mississippi River on the left. Obviously, a lot of concern early in January with little precipitation that had occurred in December and the first part of January, and then, of course, the antecedent conditions. We had some justifiable concerns of barge traffic coming to a halt and some things that were done to try to mitigate that, but starting at the end of January, we had a significant rain event that brought anywhere from 1 to 2 inches of rain across a good portion of Missouri and Illinois, led to that bump to near normal conditions, and that has pretty much kind of held sway with the recent snow events that we had in February. Some more precipitation events in March has bumped that up actually to above normal conditions. And then the map on the right shows just how quickly things have changed from serious low water levels to now, running perhaps bank full, in fact, even running above flood stage. The reds and the oranges and the yellow dots are indicative of flood stages that are where the rivers are at flood stage or above flood stage, especially around the St. Louis area, along the Illinois River over in Illinois, and a complete change than what we saw at the beginning of the year when we had some very concerning low water conditions. That is not the case now, at least not along the Mississippi River. On the ag sector, looking at how this drought has been impacting agriculture from during the winter season and up until now, on the left is in the various shades of green are the major livestock areas, in the dark green, minor livestock areas in the lighter green. And that was a month ago on the left, how the conditions were. And then the red hatchet lines are where we have severe drought impacting the country. On the right, you can see a little bit of improvement. I put a percentage number in the lower left on the Arizona-New Mexico border, showing on the left where 67% of the cattle area was experiencing drought. There has been a slight improvement, 5% down to 62% now being impacted. I think most of the benefit came across the eastern edge of that drought, perhaps from portions of southeast Iowa and a good part of Missouri where we've seen some decent precip events as of late. We have seen improving conditions for cattle areas, as well as a little bit of southeastern United States around Florida. We've seen some improvement there. With respect to hay areas experiencing drought, of a lot of pasture in the darker green, and in the lighter green, some minor growing areas. So I want to focus perhaps on the darker green where we have a lot of pasture land and forage crops. But you can see, again, a slight improvement, about a 6% improvement on the left, 57% of hay areas were experiencing severe drought as of February 19th. We fast forward to March 12th on the right, we're down to 51%. So just a little over half of the hay area is now experiencing drought. Again, the benefits most associated in parts of Missouri and southeast Iowa. Missouri is a big forage crop state. We have a lot of pasture land, and so that has been these rains and snows that we have had have done some significant benefits in regard to moistening up the soil profile and leading to better conditions. For winter wheat, we again see a little bit of improvement, not a lot, but nonetheless a step in the right direction. The darker green areas showing major growing areas across a good portion of eastern Colorado, western Kansas, a little bit of southern Nebraska, down into Oklahoma. Some improvement. When you're on the right, you can see we've gone from 59% on the left to 56% on the right, so a 3% improvement in winter wheat areas. And again, most of that occurring across Missouri and parts of southeast Iowa. The soil moisture anomaly, this is on the picture is the left, taken again about a month ago on February 15th, the soil moisture conditions, and then on the right, the soil moisture conditions, the anomaly on March 18th, and pretty much a fairly stagnant condition. I think a lot of the reason for that is that generally from Nebraska and Iowa on north, the soils are still freezing. We still have a significant frost line, and so little opportunity, despite the snow and rain events, little opportunity for moisture infiltration into the soil profile because of those frozen conditions. Better off, though, as you go perhaps a little bit further south, where we did not have a frost line for much of the winter season across Missouri, southern Illinois, and on into Kansas. We have had a little bit more percolation, infiltration of that moisture into the soil profile, and so we definitely do see some improving soil moisture conditions across a good portion of Missouri and maybe a little bit of southeast Iowa. I talked a little bit about soil temperatures. This is a map that shows the average weekly soil temperature between the period of March 10th to the 16th. This is a map from the Weekly Weather and Crop Bulletin. And again, frozen conditions or near freezing conditions impacting, at least over the past week or so, much of North Dakota into South Dakota, Minnesota, parts of Wisconsin, northern Iowa. We have frost line at least at the 4 inches under the bare soil. Thawing out conditions, pretty much no frost line across portions of Kansas, Missouri on into central southern Illinois and points southward. The drought condition scenario, generally improvement, and I don't see much in regard to worsening conditions. Of course, we have seen more precipitation events over the past month or so across the central region. Status quo across the western region. On the left is the map from a month ago. On the right is the newly released drought monitor conditions according to the National Drought Mitigation Center, the drought monitor map. We do, of course, see notable improvement across southern Wisconsin, northern Illinois, southeast Iowa. A good chunk of Missouri is essentially drought-free, and some pockets of improvement perhaps in the North Dakota and parts of Nebraska. But overall, pretty much when you look at the western half of the central region, not a lot of improvement across the plains on into southern Montana, Wyoming, and Colorado. Now look at the climate outlook. So I'm first going to look at the 7-day precipitation forecast, since we have a fairly strong system that is expected to impact a good portion of the central region this weekend. The 2-week outlook will be followed by the new outlook for April, as well as the seasonal outlook for the months of April, May, and June. And then the new drought map that shows the seasonal drought forecast over the next 3 months, as well as the new flood outlook has just been issued today. So this is the precipitation forecast over the next 7 days according to the Weather Prediction Center. Again, we have a fairly strong system that's making landfall and will be impacting a good portion of the central part of the country and eastern parts of the United States over the next 7 days. The green line, the half-inch contour, we see some decent precip expected anywhere from a half to 1 inch. Extending from portions of Wyoming, east-southeastward to southern Nebraska, all of Kansas, and the contours actually go up a little bit even heavier as you go into Missouri, 1 to 1.5 inches from southwest Missouri all the way into southeastern U.S. So a fairly widespread event. I think what's unusual about this event is that a lot of it's going to take at least across the middle part of the country, it's going to take the form of snow. So especially from Colorado eastward to Missouri, there's the potential for a fairly late winter or early spring snow event to drop several inches, which will be obviously very welcome across Colorado and into Kansas. More moisture in the ground perhaps, and perhaps could help the winter wheat crop out a little bit and some of the mountain snowpack in Colorado. The outlook over the next couple weeks, we still have a negative phase of the Arctic Oscillation that's anticipated to continue into next week. And so, again, it looks like the month of March is going to be one of the coldest ones we've seen in at least perhaps 17 years, even perhaps 30 years if these much below normal temperatures continue, and it does look like, according to the 2-week outlook, at least spilling into April, the first few days of April, these below normal temperatures are forecast to continue. There are enhanced probabilities of below normal temperatures are forecast across about the eastern half of the United States, as well as California and up in Alaska. On the right is the precipitation outlook. Of course, we have a significant precip event to impact us this weekend. But as we go into the 2-week outlook, it looks like more of a drier situation, especially in the shades of brown, show the enhanced probabilities of below normal precipitation impacting the northern and central plains and northeastward into the upper Midwest and then the Northeast. Wetter conditions across the southeastern U.S. as well as California and into western Arizona for the 2-week outlook. With respect to the April temperature and precipitation probabilities, this is the new map that was just released earlier today. They are indicating, the Climate Prediction Center is indicating above normal temperatures across a good portion of the country, across the eastern U.S., southern U.S., a high enhanced likelihood for above normal temperatures. Well, it's interesting to know we're in a very cold pattern right now, and that is expected to continue through the end of March. So obviously the climate prediction forecasters are indicating a pattern change, one that looks to be perhaps a warmer one for the southern and eastern United States. And it's interesting to note that I believe the forecast for March was supposed to be above normal, and so that obviously is not the case this year, but it'll be interesting to see if this verifies considering what is expected over the next couple of weeks. I think what went into this forecast, of course, are the recent trends over the past 10 to 15 years, as well as some of the decadal trends since the early 1980s. Below normal temperatures are forecast across the Pacific Northwest and southern Alaska. On the right are the precipitation probabilities. Perhaps a wetter scenario for the upper Midwest, extending into the Ohio River Valley, the highest likelihood across portions of Minnesota, Wisconsin, into Michigan. And below normal precipitation probabilities are indicated across the mid-Atlantic coast, across the southeastern U.S., down into the tip of Texas, as well as the southwestern U.S. I believe also this April, actually we'll go to the seasonal outlook. This is for April, May, and June. I believe this is very similar to the March, April, May, the spring outlook, in regard to what the temperature trends are forecasted to be over the 3-month period from April through June. Higher likelihood, enhanced probabilities of above normal temperatures across a good portion of the country, from Nevada and on eastward to the East Coast. Highest likelihood for those above normal temperatures across the southern plains and the northeastern U.S. I think what was taken into consideration for this above normal temperature trends perhaps across the south are those dry soil moisture conditions that are perhaps going to persist into the spring season, as well as looking at the trends, the decadal trends of what those temperatures have been like over, say, the past 30 years or so. Cooler than normal conditions across the Pacific Northwest is forecast for April through June. On the right, the precipitation probabilities from April through June. A pocket of wetness is expected across a good portion of the Midwest, extending well from eastern Kansas into Missouri, parts of a good portion of Iowa, Wisconsin, Illinois, on into Indiana, Ohio, and up into Michigan. Higher likelihood or enhanced probabilities of above normal precipitation to occur over those 3 months. In the white, you see the EC. Those are equal chances for above, below, and near normal, both temperature and precipitation. That's what the EC stands for. This is the new seasonal drought outlook that just came out today. Somewhat encouraging when we look at the forecast over the next few months. In the areas of green, there is an indication for the drought that is likely to improve and impacts to ease somewhat. That is for much of the northern plains and the upper Midwest, as well as eastern Kansas, western Missouri. Perhaps some ongoing, but nonetheless improvement in that hatched area, extending from southern Montana, portion of Wyoming into much of Nebraska, and central Kansas down into eastern Oklahoma. Unfortunately, there are indicators perhaps of persistence across the southwest, the western U.S., and down into Texas and southeastern and southeastern U.S., especially the state of Florida. So, and this is a forecast over the next 3 months, valid from March 21st through June 30th. This is also a map that was just issued by the Hydrologic Information Center showing the flood risk over the next few months, the spring flood risk. Of course, we have seen improving conditions with more moisture, more rain and snow events across the Mississippi River Basin, and that is indicative of the changes we've seen. We've seen much better flow conditions. We do have a decent snowpack up in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and the spring is the wet season, and so flooding to occur along the Mississippi River Basin is not all that unusual. And so considering the current conditions and perhaps what is typically occurs in the spring, there is evidence perhaps of some minor to perhaps moderate flood potential across a good portion of the Mississippi River Basin, as well as the Ohio River Basin, from Ohio down to southern Illinois. Also the Red River Basin across portions of northwest Minnesota, eastern North Dakota, northern North Dakota, where they have a fairly deep snowpack. There also is a good snowpack across northeastern Montana, and it's because of those conditions, frozen soil conditions, deep snowpack, that there is the perhaps the probability for a moderate to perhaps major flooding, especially along the Red River Basin as we roll into spring. In summary, with respect to the recent conditions over the past few weeks, below normal temperatures have dominated much of the central region, thanks in part to the negative Arctic oscillation. Only parts of Montana, western South Dakota, and southwest Wyoming have experienced marginally warmer than normal conditions over the past 30 days or so. Since about the middle part of February, precipitation has generally averaged above normal across the eastern half of the central region and near to below normal across the western part of the central region. Drought conditions have indeed improved, most notably across southern portions of Wisconsin, northern Illinois, southeastern Iowa, and much of Missouri. Unfortunately, we still do have extreme to exceptional drought impacting a good portion of the plains, extending from South Dakota to Texas. That also includes portions of Wyoming and Colorado, experiencing the extreme to exceptional drought conditions here in the central region. We have seen improved flow conditions along the Mississippi River, but really little to no improvement across most of the upper Missouri River Basin. With respect to outlooks, we are in a neutral condition when it comes to the El Nino, La Nina, southern oscillation, and that is anticipated to persist into the spring and perhaps well into the growing season. For the central region, drought conditions are expected to persist in portions of southwestern Wyoming, much of Colorado, and extreme southwestern Kansas. Some improvements are expected for southern Montana, the northeastern half of Wyoming, far northeastern Colorado, the central and northern plains, as well as the upper Midwest over the next few months. There is spring flood potential that exists along the Red River Basin, across portions of North Dakota, lower Missouri River Basin, the Mississippi River Basin, as well as the Ohio River Basin. Here is a listing of some of the partners, the collaborators, and resources where you can access the recorded presentation and some various web links that can be very helpful to access a lot of the slides and the current slides that I've shown in today's presentation. Many thanks, John, for the opportunity to speak today. Of course, could open up the lines for questions and listing of some of the climate scientists, experts, and weather experts, some email address and phone numbers that go with those.